بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Can a small, exhausted group of believers hold their ground against an army 3 times their size and confident in its power? The answer reveals the true meaning of faith, showing that true victory does not come from numbers or strength, but from sincere hearts that trust in Allah. In the previous episode, we saw the growing challenges in Medina as the Prophet ﷺ dealt with hidden hypocrisy within the city and increasing threats from outside. We witnessed the community strengthen its identity through the change of the Qibla and the first permission to defend their lives and their faith. Now the long-building tension in the desert reaches its breaking point as the believers move toward a small oasis called Badr. This episode tells the story of the first great test between truth and falsehood, a day that clearly separated right from wrong. We will see the courage of the companions, the Prophet's wise strategy, and the divine support that turned what seemed like certain defeat into a victory of faith. The journey to the Valley of Badr was not meant as a war, but as a mission to recover the honor and property taken from the emigrants when they left Mecca. When news came to Medina that a large caravan led by Abu Sufyan was returning from Syria, the Prophet ﷺ saw a chance to apply economic pressure on the Quraysh. He set out with just over 300 men, most carrying only the essentials for travel rather than the heavy armor of a trained army. Among those who remained in Medina was Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhu, whose wife Ruqayya radiyallahu anha, the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was sick. The Prophet commanded him to stay behind to care for her, showing his deep compassion for family even in times of conflict. Abu Sufyan, skilled in desert travel, noticed the Muslims' movement and immediately sent a desperate message to Mecca asking for reinforcements. The Quraysh reacted with a long-held anger, gathering an army of 1,000 men, including their proudest leaders, and hundreds of cavalry. When the Muslims reached the valley, they found that the caravan had slipped away, leaving them facing a massive, vengeful army. The Prophet stood before his men and sought their advice, making sure that both the emigrants and the helpers were prepared for a fight they had not fully anticipated. The Ansar responded with a heartfelt pledge of loyalty, promising to follow the Prophet even if he led them into the depths of the sea. This shared determination transformed a group of ordinary people into a solid force that the Quraysh would soon find impossible to overcome. The stage was set for a clash that would determine the future of the message and the destiny of the entire Arabian Peninsula. As the two armies camped close to each other, the thought of what awaited them in the morning kept everyone uneasy. The Meccan camp was full of noise, the slaughtering of camels, and the arrogant laughter of men who believed their victory was inevitable. On the other hand, the believers' camp was calm and peaceful, a quiet blessing from the heavens that steadied their hearts. It started to rain lightly, making the ground solid for the Muslims but muddy and hard to walk on for the Meccans. The companions slept deeply, and their rest refreshed them, taking away their worry and filling them with a calm sense of peace. The Prophet ﷺ, however, stayed awake all night in a small shelter made of palm branches, praying and weeping as he turned to Allah. He poured out his heart in prayer, knowing that if this small group of believers were lost, there would be no one left on earth to truly worship Allah. He held his hands high in prayer through the night and trusting fully in Allah, laying the foundation for the coming victory. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu remained close, quietly supporting him and witnessing the profound devotion of the Prophet as he prayed for his people. The night of rain and rest was a blessing that prepared the 300 men to face a day that would push both their courage and faith to the limit against the enemy. As the sun rose over the hills of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ showed that strong faith must go hand in hand with careful planning and smart strategy. He first picked a place to camp, but his companion Hubab ibn Mundhir radiallahu anhu politely asked whether the choice was guided by revelation or by military strategy. When the Prophet said it was based on strategy, Hubab suggested they move closer to the water source and block the other wells, leaving the enemy with no water in the desert heat. The Prophet accepted the advice without hesitation, showing the humility of a leader who listens to the wisdom of his companions. He then organized his men into straight, disciplined rows, unlike the typical Arabian style where warriors fought separately and without coordination. He moved among the ranks with a small arrow in his hand, straightening the lines and making sure that every man clearly understood their position and role. This strict order gave the Muslims a sense of unity that made their small group look far stronger to the Meccan scouts on the hills. The Prophet ﷺ instructed his men to hold their positions and save their arrows until the enemy was close, showing them the strength in patience and self-control. The wells of Badr became the key focus of the battle, a vital advantage gained through careful planning and organized strategy. The believers stood shoulder to shoulder, their lines resembling the rows of prayer they practiced 5 times a day in the mosque. In the ancient style of Arabian fighting, the clash began with one-on-one duels that set a tone of legendary bravery for the Muslim community. 3 of the most feared Meccan champions stepped forward and called for challengers of equal status from their own people to face them. The Prophet ﷺ called upon his close family members, Ali ibn Abi Talib and Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib radiyallahu anhum, along with his companion Ubaydah ibn al-Harith radiyallahu anhu, to face the Meccan champions. Hamza radiyallahu anhu, known as the Lion of Allah, moved with fierce strength that frightened his opponent, wearing an ostrich feather on his chest as a symbol of courage. Beside him, the young Ali radiallahu anhu stepped forward as the standard bearer, his presence marking him as the victorious Lion of Allah who would never flee from a challenge. Within moments, Hamza had struck down his rival with a single powerful blow, while Ali moved with lightning speed to defeat the champion facing him. This act of bravery marked Ali radiallahu anhu as one of history's greatest warriors, a man forever linked with the legendary sword, Zulfikar. Nearby, Umar radiallahu anhu, known as Al-Faruq, stood firm as a guardian of faith, prepared to defend the messenger with the same intensity he had once used to oppose him. Their fight was not for personal fame, but to defend the messenger of Allah and the message of unity that the Quraysh tried to destroy. The victory in these duels struck fear into the hearts of the Meccans as their greatest warriors fell before the full battle had even started. It showed the Quraysh that the men they had once mocked were now like lions of the desert, driven by a spirit and a strength they could not break. When the Meccan army finally launched their attack, the valley of Badr turned into a storm of noise, clashing steel, and rising dust that pushed every soldier to their limits. The Prophet ﷺ remained on the battlefield, moving among his companions while also turning back to his shelter to pray deeply, asking Allah for the victory that would preserve the light of Islam. Suddenly he appeared, his face glowing with joy, and told Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu that Allah's help had come in the form of thousands of angels. The Quran describes this moment as a divine intervention, when unseen forces came to strengthen the hearts of the believers and fill the disbelievers with fear. Umar radiallahu anhu fought with the strength of 10 men, striking with such force and clarity that each blow seemed to separate truth from falsehood. The Muslims felt a sudden rush of energy that lifted their exhaustion, driving back the Quraysh cavalry with a force they had never known. Even as the sand stung their eyes and the sun drained their strength, the believers fought together with such unity that they moved as one body. The Prophet picked up a handful of pebbles and threw them toward the Meccan army, a symbolic act that was followed by sudden confusion and blindness in the enemy ranks. The pride of the Quraysh began to break as they realized they were not just fighting men, but confronting the power and justice of Allah. The clash of swords was joined by the unseen force of countless angels moving through the valley like a storm from the heavens. In that hour, the impossible became reality as a group of 300 believers stood strong against 1,000, lifted by the power of their Lord. As the sun moved toward the west, the proud Quraysh army lost heart and fled in panic, leaving 70 of their men dead and 70 captured. Among the fallen were the same leaders who had spent years torturing the Muslims, including Abu Jahl, a chief figure behind much of that suffering. This victory was not about revenge, but about the oppressed finally standing above their oppressors and ending tribal injustice. The Prophet ﷺ walked across the battlefield with deep sadness, grieving for those who had let pride lead them to their end instead of accepting the truth. He commanded that all the dead of both sides be treated with respect, making sure even the Meccan leaders were buried together in a common grave to honor their humanity. The captives were brought to Medina, where the Prophet established a new, compassionate way of treating prisoners of war. He instructed his companions to treat the captives with kindness, giving them food, and letting those who could read and write earn their freedom by teaching Muslim children. This act of mercy at the time of victory was perhaps even more remarkable than the battle itself, showing that the Muslims were creating a society rooted in character, not just in power. The Battle of Badr was more than a military victory and marked the birth of a new reality where the small and weak could triumph over the mighty through faith and unity. It showed that when a community stands for justice and trusts sincerely in Allah, even the natural order can shift to support them. The believers returned to Medina not as refugees, but as a recognized power that the entire Arabian Peninsula would now have to respect. However, the Prophet ﷺ knew that this triumph was only the beginning of a much longer and more difficult journey. In our next episode, we will see how the shock of Badr spread grief and anger through Mecca, pushing them to seek revenge and create new problems. We will explore what happened after the battle and how a dangerous poet tried to disturb the peace of Medina with his words. Join us as we witness the rising tensions that will test the believer's resilience in the shadows of revenge. May Allah bless us with the courage of Badr and the wisdom to use our successes for the benefit of all humanity.